Last but certainly not least is, oh, oh, recording is in progress. Okay, last but certainly not least is Dr. Sean O'Connor, who is a licensed clinical psychologist currently working within the VA St. Louis healthcare system, and he is serving as a team leader for the PTSD clinical team and as the specialty mental health programs director. He has also served as the VISN 15 PTSD mentor and been involved in policy and systems redesign at the local VISN and national levels. So welcome again. We have an exciting panel here for you guys. So I want to go ahead and kick it off with some questions that were kind of predetermined ahead of time. But I really want to encourage all of our audience members, if you have a question that has just been, kind of burning on your mind, please put it into the chat and we will address it. But the first question that we want to get started off by asking is, and we're going to direct this question to a couple of panelists, though these questions are open to everyone. Okay, so first, Dr. Carter and Dr. Engcall, this question is directed more for you. How do you define work-life balance for yourself, and has that changed over time? It doesn't matter who would like to go first.
Things that jumped off me. First off, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak in these forums, especially with such an esteemed group of others about mental health professionals and psychologists. So once again, thank you for having me. When I think about work-life balance, the way I try to define it is how am I experiencing myself? How am I experiencing myself as I'm moving through my day-to-day life? Because there's times that I know a lot of us here have pursued this career because it is something that we experience as fulfilling. So work-life balance is never going to be this thing that is this 50-50 split. I think for me currently, I kind of live on a 70-30 split. But in that sense, for me, what it is I define work-life balance as is the majority of what I'm doing, things that I experience as fulfilling and things that are moving towards what the aspects that I value. And this is engaged in something I've had to develop over time for myself. What are my values? What are the things I experience are important to me? And whether it be myself, my family, my career goals, my own personal goals, and how those things shift over. And those things have definitely shifted over time. When I was in graduate school, my primary focus was complete that dissertation. I joke there's a local coffee shop here in Detroit that I believe I that technically sponsors my dissertation because of how much time I spent there, just powering away. I'd get there at 8 a.m. and I'd stay there until I could no longer see straight. But I say that in a little bit of tongue in cheek. But in all honesty, that shifts over time. Whether I have a young daughter, things of those nature, those things shift, and how I balance those things are really important. So I guess my best way of defining work-life balance for me is what am I mostly engaging in things that are in line with my goals and my values, and those goals and values have often shift over time.
Great. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think what I would say would echo a lot of what Dr. Carter shared. I think often when people talk about work-life balance, they show a picture of like a scale, with the two scales. And not that I don't necessarily think that that's wrong, but I wonder what's in those scales. Like, I don't think that, at least for me, that work-life balance means equal time, and or even equal energy, because I think those are finite resources, and just by virtue of a tour of duty, it may not be equal time. I have two little kids. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and they're only awake so long. So it's not, I can't make them stay up longer so I can just spend more time with them. But I would say instead that work-life balance is aiming to really increase satisfaction, trying to equalize, I guess, satisfaction with work and with life, also trying to reduce the conflicts between those two. And so in my role with VA Central Office, I help oversee all the psychotherapies. And so I would put on my psychologist hat and think of what does it mean to operationalize satisfaction? I think that's important when we're thinking about work-life balance. I appreciate the mention of values, but I think, think of if we can't operationalize and measure or set like a SMART goal of what something might look like, then it's easy to just always not feel satisfied. So I try to think pretty concretely. And so I mentioned one of the things that was very important for me that when things felt out of balance was that I was still at work when my kids were having dinner and getting ready for bed. So if they go to bed at 7:30, and it was important for me to at least to spend some time with them, and ideally to have dinner with them, spend time with them. Also important for me to think about, I am partnering in this part of my life with my husband who also works full time, and we don't have family in San Diego. And so really thinking about equalizing, I think, efforts there, minimizing conflict, and making sure we're in agreement. And I think also, what are my goals for work? So, I have my own personal goals for work. I want to be a high performer. I want to make sure I'm meeting the mission. I care about the work that I do a lot, making sure I'm helping the VA and our veterans, being really responsive. For me, I like to keep my email box empty. Otherwise, I start to feel overwhelmed. I have a lot of hats on, which I think is an awesome part of being a psychologist. Teaching, research, consultation is really important for me. And over time, this has changed. I started as a staff psychologist, a lot of direct patient care. And now the way that I help patients is a lot more in my national role setting, being kind of working with the field. So I think part of that being flexible and dynamic, there'll be times when I'm hitting urgencies at home and with work, and that's okay for me. I think that feels like a balance. And honestly, right now, the struggle for me when I think work-life balance is how am I spending my time? So especially at home, am I spending time going to a yoga class or with my kids? So it's that kind of work-life balance. I actually feel like in some ways, having a family helps me create better boundaries around work and time related to that. But I think definitely not equal time, but I think about this a lot and trying to maximize satisfaction across both.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that definition. And and kind of the way that how that's changed over time for both of you, I think is really awe-inspiring. Now, I do want to open this up to Dr. Robinson and Dr. O'Connor just to see, kind of what your all's thoughts on, how you tend to define work-life balance and, maybe some of the changes that you've noticed over time as well.
Yeah, when I looked at the question, I thought, ooh, this is a good one, right? So looking at strategies, I think for me, it's been my focus is to normalize peace and prioritize joy, right? And not having any shame or guilt about it. And so I know that may sound kind of like philosophical, but like, what does that really look like in a work environment? So for me, normalizing peace would be making sure I take both 15-minute breaks and a full 30-minute lunch, right? And not always consistently just working straight through. Normalizing peace looks like adjusting my standards on busy days so that I can end my tour of duty on time, right? Like sometimes if I have a to-do list and from my own whatever standards, I want to finish everything on it, right? But then I have to say, peace also looks like not zooming through traffic to pick your 13-year-old up on time so that he's not the last kid on the curb, right? So that's kind of what that looks like for me. Normalizing peace also looks like not putting off bathroom breaks, right? And making those standard. And it sounds so silly, but sometimes you can very easily get caught up. And if anyone on here has ever worked in PCMHI, you're on your fifth warm handoff and you're in your seat thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, when is this going to be over? When you could just say to yourself, I could have just done that before and the world wouldn't have ended if I'd have took a few minutes before. So when I say normalizing peace, like that's what that looks like for me, like in the workplace. Prioritizing joy in the workplace looks like volunteering for meetings and committees that resonate with my authentic self. For example, we have a health equity committee here. And so, looking at, I'll volunteer for that because we've been able to do great work with trying to reduce healthcare disparities. And it's led to my CBOC having a food pantry. And so for me, helping to fulfill a food order and walking groceries out to the car is not necessarily me doing problem solving skills in treatment, but it's as fulfilling and it's a bit of joy in my job. Um, Being a part of organizations or groups at my job that are also fulfilling, like our cultural competency committee, right? So making sure that if I'm volunteering for committees or for groups, or even internship training, that it's things that resonate with my authentic self, things that I would do even if it were outside of work. So I think for me, that's kind of how I've tried to instill that balance with infusing, making sure that my work duties kind of help me to keep that balance.
I'll jump in. I always find it amusing, this term work-life balance. We have two different things. One of them is our life, and then there's a separate thing that we call work. And that's not my experience of it. And that it doesn't really feel like they're separate to me. And how do we integrate them is always the question. I will say I have a particular challenge, I think, in that my significant other also works at the same facility I do. And so that is a special kind of challenge for us. And it is, I think that challenge has helped me to be attuned to what I call clocking out. And what I mean by that is when it is your break time, when you're done with work for the day, not being stuck cognitively going back over things and sort of kind of working in the non-work day. If we take some of the things that we tell our patients about scheduled worry time, if they have insomnia or things like that, using the physician heal thyself, approach, and making sure that when we're at work, we do give it our all and we have our full focus. But then also that we really do try to put a boundary there where we are not also kind of halfway thinking about work while we're doing other things. That really is kind of crucially important, both with your breaks and your lunch, but also with your weekends and your nighttime. And I tell you, if I am having dreams about work, that's when I know something has gone south. So that's my basic definition of work-life balance.
I can absolutely appreciate all of those definitions. And, I think that you're right. It is so important to kind of remember the things that we teach our clients and our patients and say, hey, I'm human too. I might experience some of these things too. Maybe I should take some of my own advice here, and really finding the importance in that. So thank you.
There was one thing I was remiss as we were all talking about. We were all talking about leaving work. One of the things that I actually think is actually the most important thing for my work-life balance is how I come into work. So things that I know I need to make sure that if I'm already in the wrong headspace, like sometimes I will shoot my direct supervisor and say, I'm gonna be 5 minutes late because I'm gonna make sure I get breakfast this morning. because even though it's just like that rushing and those, because we'll feel like those time and those commitments that we make to the work that we do which is really valuable, we'll maybe sacrifice aspects of the self. And so one things that I know I do is making sure I go for my runs in the morning. I'll go make sure I have come to work with a hot coffee in my hand, and being in those spaces is really about like having that mentality of like, I'm not starting today rushing. Like I oftentimes will have to catch myself just not starting today rushing is a way in which I make sure that I kind of set that boundary. As I know I've seen a couple comments in the chat of it when I'm starting into work, also throughout and going throughout the day. Because when I come in rush, my entire day is rushed.
Absolutely. Yeah, that plays such an important role. You're absolutely right about our mindset whenever we come into work. So it's almost as important as our mindset from when we leave work and we walk in the door at home, right? Because if we still have the day wearing on us and we feel it, and it's going to impact everyone else that we live with. So you make such a valuable point there. I do want to point out, we actually have an expansion to this question in our chat by Danielle. And she's asking, she says, I'm wondering, for those with young children, my son is 1.5 years old. Aw, how do you find the time to refill your cup to have empathy for your patients and your family and engage in all the self-care that's necessary to not feel burnt out? Is this achievable when baby is so young? Being 7 months, almost 7 months pregnant myself, I resonate with this so much. So I'm going to open the floor to all y'all and just see what you guys have to say about this.
Well, like I mentioned, my son's 13 now, but it seems like time flies. I think the definition of self-care changes with seasons of your life, right? So self-care for me with a 13-year-old could be me going for a massage or a mani-pedi because that's just me. But self-care when he was 1.5 was about, did I get a chance to do his meal prep? Right, and not be rushed for that. Did I get a chance to finish all of the laundry? Did we get a chance to work on some new words, right? So my self-care was more fulfilled by helping him to grow at that early stage. So I just think the definition of self-care changes. But definitely at that age, having a supportive leadership wherever you are will be critical. And so, working with people who understand that at that age, there are some critical life markers that you want to be present for and not work overtime all the time for. And so having those conversations where you can have that dialogue, I think are important. But yeah, I think that would be it for me. Like that definition of how you define self-care would just change. I think at that age, that definition definitely is more inclusive of helping to shape that little one.
No, I definitely can agree with that. Is like it often changes over time, and I think about when my daughter was that young. She's only 5 years old, but I think for me, the way in which I try to refill that cup, to hopefully this answers your question, is by trying my best to integrate her into that time, the things that fill my cup. So we have like we have like early on and when when my daughter was first born, we'd have daddy-daughter coffee dates. So she'd get a hot cocoa and a cookie and I get my coffee. And that would be one of our ways in which we would connect. And now as she's gotten older, one of the things we'll do is we'll like on Sundays, we'll make sure that I have like one of those big strollers and I push her in it while we go run around the town. And those are our ways of trying to connect it. So it's always going to require some kind of like what that looks like in terms of like what refills your cup. And then also I would always say setting realistic expectations that sometimes you're going to be irritable, sometimes you're going to snap, and sometimes but those and being gentle with ourselves in those spaces. So
I would agree too. I think the one thing I found it different with my first child and my second child because I think I had a different perspective by the time I had a second kid. And I think one thing I'd often remind myself is that this time with them being this small and not getting any sleep. And I think I was still nursing it when they were, and there was COVID when my daughter was at that age too, like height of it. It just that this is very finite and time limited. I felt like it was helpful to have talk to mentors and peers who also have kids. I spent a lot of time at work, like seeing the messages from daycare and looking at pictures. I think it's important to think about when you're feeling burnt out, what exactly that is. Is it not feeling connected to the work that you're doing or finding it feel meaningful? Because I think you'd address that differently versus just exhaustion, like exhaustion and energy, which is absolutely an issue because of time. But I think, yeah, it's hard. I think expectation setting and watching for setting impossible standards. If that last question, is it achievable? And I don't know what this is there. So I think that's the part that would be important to consider.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Sorry, I'll come on video. I'm multitasking as we always do. Yeah, so like I'm the chair of our DEI committee at the hospital, the behavioral health diversity team lead. I'm in PCMHI, Marva, in co-location right now. So yeah, I'm finding that all the time, I realized after I had my son that a lot of my free time was spent like recovering, sounds like a bad word, but recovering from our work. You know, I'm an empath, so it like takes a lot out of me. And so now this time is not my own anymore, it's his. And so it's like, how do I find those moments to recharge myself so I have enough for him, have enough for my husband, my dog, who gets the short end of the stick, sadly. And so, yeah, it's sort of like this recognition of you can't do everything 100% the way you used to, and you just have to sort of practice acceptance and be okay with that. But, you know, like being the A+ student, I'm just like, damn, I want to be an A+ student all the time. So I think I just need to, like you said, like all of you said, adjust my expectations. So thank you all.
But I loved your question. And something that Dr. Comrie said reminded me of those ages. In 2014, my son was 3. But that's also around that time when the killing death of Mike Brown happened. Being like the first clinical psychologist on the scene, things exploded, like not just at work, but like work outside of work. And so I remember, you know, whether if I was speaking, you know, in California or in Atlanta, no matter where, like I always brought my son with me. He was 3 and he got a kick out of it then. And so it was just mindful for me to explain to where I was going that if I'm at a table, I need a table with a skirt on it, right? Because he would be right there with his iPad on the table, or he would be off to the side of the stage. And so for me, some people would say, oh, literally you brought your child to work. It's like, well, yeah, because I don't want to miss out on too much, but this topic is also important to speak about. He thinks it's just, you know, a free vacation. So, you know, you kind of find ways to mold it too. And you're right, we can't do everything. So for some people that looks like hiring a dog walker, hiring someone to take care of the dog, or hiring someone who comes in and does the dishes, but finding ways of using those resources in other ways so that you can check things off your list realistically that you don't personally have to do yourself.
There's actually kind of, I guess, tangentially related to this, another question that came up by Dr. Zimbrino Vasquez in the chat. And this is kind of more related to leadership and being in these various roles, but related to leadership, how important do you think it is seeing work-life integration modeled by your supervisors, right? And if you don't see it modeled, how do you create your boundaries? Or as leaders, is that something you consider in your own leadership style? So I want to open the floor up to this question, just kind of see what you guys feel about this. I mean, do you think that, because I know every VA, one of the biggest mottos, and I've been to several VAs, and one of the biggest mottos, you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA, right? They're all different. And, you know, I think the culture that's at each VA is very different. It also depends on where you are in the country, right? I feel like some VAs, it's really prioritized, you know, to be 100% clinical, right? And to, you know, do your documentation at home. And that's kind of the expectation, whereas other VAs, maybe that's not the expectation, right? So how much of that, you know, is really echoed in leadership? How much of that influences you and the way that you integrate that balance into your life between work and personal?
So I could start. I joined the VA in 2008, and my mentor or supervisor, Sonia Norman, and I've kept a relationship with her as a mentor. But one of the things when I joined July 1st, started internship, she was starting her maternity leave. And I thought that was so great to see, because that was something I was looking for in an internship, was other women who seemed to be good at their work, but also have families. That was something I didn't feel like I had seen in graduate school. And so now it's a funny perspective, because that child is about to go to college, you know, and so it also helps with my own perspective, taking like that she was very busy, you know, did different things. And she's someone I'll talk to about like decision making, career decision making related to family or helping make decisions that and trying to do this elusive balance. But it's been meaningful being a leader. So in my role when I was with San Diego, I worked with a lot of early career psychologists, and some of the things that I would hear were that, you know, hey, they decided to apply for leadership positions, even though they have small kids or they're thinking of starting a family because they saw that I had. And I thought that was just so meaningful, although it felt really lonely when I was the only kind of leader with the little ones. But it's become more normative. And I think that's been really nice to see. So at least personally, I see it as important. I didn't ever try to hide that I had kids. I'd call out sick if my little one was sick, and start meetings by seeing if anyone wants to see a picture of my kid today. But I just think it's part of it is also being human, and I think learning from other people, it's an important part and value that I see, at least in the work that I do.
I'll jump in. So as a leader thinking about burnout and managing these things, I will say when you look at what are some of the contributors to burnout, there are things like lack of control, sometimes lack of clarity or ambiguity in terms of priorities, lack of recognition or rewards, lack of support. And saying all those things, to be just very frank, VA has special challenges in all those areas. And, you know, and you can talk to people at different VAs, which I do a lot. And here, you know, here we can't keep scheduling staff. Here we, you know, have this problem, that problem. And so if you're a supervisor, you know, let's just say the lack of recognition or rewards part. If you're a supervisor at the VA, you do not have what maybe some private sector leaders have, where they can say, that was great, I'm going to give you a bonus, or I'm going to give you a raise or something. For the federal government, it's a whole different ball game. And so when we look at the truth of the matter, that VA and working within the federal government has its own challenges, because the truth of it, I think, is a lot of the things that we have to look at could be subsumed somewhat under the category of flexibility. Right? How do we meet the needs of you as an individual? How do we help make sure that your job is meaningful? How do we see what helps motivate you as a person? And just frankly, flexibility is not the number one thing that the federal government is known for. It's not what we do best, is be flexible, right? But a thing that we try to do locally is to, instead of focusing on the different strictures, really emphasizing what is still within our locus of control, what are things that we can do, and just really truly emphasize those. So I cannot give my staff a ad hoc bonus when they did a good job, but I do have a mandatory part of every team meeting where we have shout outs, where we emphasize when somebody did amazing clinical work or really pitched in as a team member and how much that's appreciated. And that means a lot. That means a whole lot. And most of us are probably clinical, but if you did your EPPP and you remember parts of the IO section, you will remember probably that monetary reward is among the things that can help motivate people. But there's so many other ways to, for instance, provide recognition and help your staff find parts of what they can control within the strictures that we work at. If that's helping to encourage them to take part in a committee or to vary up some of their job duties, to share things with other staff members, cross-train, whatever that can be, showing that even though we're not the most flexible organization in the world, we do what we can within it, and it matters to us, and it matters to us that it matters to you is I think is crucial.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, that response and really focusing on how can we help our team, because in vast majority of positions in the VA, you do work as a team, whether it's within your own discipline or multiple disciplines, and being able to provide that balance to the people around you can kind of help fill your cup, so to speak. right? I know one of the threads that's been trending in our chat is this idea of kind of, being this straight A personality type, right? Being the achievers, and, talking to many of you who are leaders. As an early career psychologist, what advice or strategies have you used to reduce burnout, right? Or to not kind of jump into so many things right off rip that you just become absolutely exhausted at the end of the day? Because I feel like there's probably a lot of people on this call who, have that, here's an opportunity, I'm going to grab it. Oh, here's another one, I'm going to grab it. Oh, here's another one. And, before you know it, you're just kind of overflowing with all of this opportunity. So I really want to open this up to everyone and say, given our perfectionist mentalities, right? How do you manage? What are your strategies in day-to-day life for managing burnout?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that jumping around, and it reminded me of a story that I had. I ran into my first supervisor roughly about 3 or 4 months after I graduated, and I was on postdoc, and I stopped him and I said, "Hey, why didn't you tell me it doesn't get less busy?" and he was just like, what do you, he's just like, yeah, it doesn't. It stays similarly busy as it is in graduate school, but you get better at managing it. And I was just like, how? He's like, you'll learn over time. And we like laughed, and we had a drink and we talked and we caught up. But 'cause I hadn't seen him since I'd been on internship and postdocs, and we kind of so. But I mentioned that is like, how do I manage my, because you answer this question is like, how do I manage that burnout? And it's like a delicate line balance, because I think for me, and I think this might be different for different folks, is having that variety is what stops me from getting burnt out. Not doing the same thing day to day. And like, I know that like a lot of different roles of the VA, there's sometimes can be a lot more specific, but I am very new to the VA, even though I'm maybe 7 8 years post graduation. This is my first year at the VA. So previously I was in the private sector and kind of doing things around, and I kind of would see the VA around. I lived nearby it, and I was just like, oh, that seems like a really good opportunity. But all these roles seemed really specific. So like the role I ended up coming in is like, I'm the mental health staff psychologist for mental health homeless. That's 10 different programs. That means I have 10 different feet I can jump in and out in. It's like I can go from seeing folks that are specifically involved with our HUD-VASH department to folks that are in our transitional housing, to our folks that are like literally homeless and everything in between, or in our diversion program. So there's like a wide array of folks that I end up seeing, and wide array of like hats I end up seeing. So it ends up having the differing responsibilities give me my own flexibility, because in that sense. And so I guess I guess I don't know if they have a good answer for what reduces burnout. Is more the idea of it's like being able to. I guess I do have an answer. Is the more in which you're able to develop a role in which you have your own agency, you're able to kind of decide what you're doing, and it's not really feels like forced upon. Because I know, and as many of the people on this call probably have 36 different responsibilities, and maybe gotten 2 or 5 team messages, and I know I've gotten 4 emails while we've been meeting today. We have all these different like responsibilities and pools, and I think the more in which the roles in which we do and the things in which we do we feel like we have agency in how we address those things, and that's being modeled not just from us, but from those that we work around. Is I think it can be really valuable.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And definitely concur with kind of being in that different role piece, right? And being able to do different things. And I think being in PCMHI, I myself, you feel like you always have a bunch of different things to do. It's never, you're never really sitting still, right? You're always moving from one room to the next. And so it does feel a little bit like, yes, I can change it up, and it doesn't feel as monotonous because it's something that's different every day. So really finding something to switch up your day, and finding something to kind of switch up your schedule a little bit where you're not doing the same thing every day. I think what I hear is that's how you've kind of been able to manage the burnout, like throughout your career, or at least while you've been here in the VA, which welcome to the VA, by the way.
I will tell people I'm new. I've been told that I get to say that I'm new for my first 5 years.
In that case, I'm new as well. All right, I do want to open this question up to other panelists and see what you guys have to say. Just kind of about the ways that you have managed burnout, the ways that you have implemented strategies so that you don't kind of feel that early on in your career.
So I think I shared a couple of the strategies earlier, talking about like your breaks and things like that. I think one thing that that's helped for me is to be a part of two groups or organizations or committees that speak to things that I love. DEI work, healthcare disparities, equity, things like that. But also to join one group or committee that is something that you're not used to. Because in doing that, it keeps me in the student-like manner in terms of always learning something new. So being a part of our hospital's overdose review committee has been my new thing. I didn't have a ton of experience with substance use or overdose or opiates. So I said, why not shy? I didn't want to shy away from something that was new. And so by doing that, it gives you a fresh angle. It's something totally different. You meet different colleagues that would not normally be in the other spaces that you're used to being in. And so it kind of just gives you that student-like feel all over again. And so when you're a part of something new and you're learning, it's kind of like refreshing to have something new on your plate. So, and not wanting to overwhelm yourself, but just making some space. So maybe taking some other things off, but just making some space for something that maybe stretches you clinically or something that's totally different that you haven't done within the past 5 to 6 years.
I'll just throw something else in there that I've observed. So a lot of times when you take on a new leadership role, there is a sense that you are putting out fires a lot. So you show up and there are a bunch of problems, and then like surprise problems pop up on a regular basis, and it feels very easy to feel overwhelmed with that, and then just say my job is putting out fires, and that's all I've got. I want to encourage you, if you're going into that role, to really kind of also find a way to work on installing some form of fire suppression system, because it truly is a thing to watch. That part of why people are exhausted sometimes when there's all those fires to be put out is that there are real things that I think psychologists are uniquely equipped to do that involve analyzing systems and human behavior in ways where we can sort of create a better structure, so that people are not piling up oily rags near the furnace, that we've got fire extinguishers and sprinklers around. And so I've seen a lot of leaders come in and just say, I don't know how anybody does it. It's just nothing but crisis, crisis, crisis. And finding a way to kind of triage that and prioritize time to try to improve the system. And by the way, use your psychology skills, and impress other leaders around with things that we as a discipline are uniquely equipped to do, and really improve systems that way. And people will become less burned out over time. And for me, people around you will become less burned out over time. And for me personally, I think there's nothing better than kind of planting a seed and watching the plant grow. And so if you've created a system and you see it over time helping and making things a little better, and you see it getting tweaked and evolving, and it was something that you had a part in creatively, like that's one of the best antidotes to burnout I can think of.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to get to, there's kind of going off of this same, I guess, thread that we've been on, right, with talking about balancing leadership as well as kind of balancing burnout within the workplace and not taking it home with us. One of the questions that I had sent out to you guys was, what recommendations do you have regarding how to talk to supervisors and leaders about work-life balance concerns? Given differences in perspectives and generational norms, how do we advocate for balance without appearing like we don't want to do our work, or that we're not willing to work hard? I know I want to direct this question to Drs. Robinson and Dr. Carter. I'm also going to post this one up in the chat because I know it's kind of lengthy, and remembering that can be just a bit tedious to remember all the details of the question. So yeah, I want to open it up to you guys and just kind of ask about this, because as we are talking about this balance and how we maintain it, and how we can wear all of these different hats, what is your advice when there's a difference in perspective, right? Maybe because of generational norms, but when there's a difference in perspective of our supervisors or even maybe our VA culture, right? How do you manage to kind of fill your plate, so to speak, in a balanced way that doesn't appear like you don't want to do your work, or that you're not a hard worker?
When I first read the question, I kind of chuckled a bit because I think about when talking with other colleagues, because I also serve as an adjunct professor. And I think to myself, I think my work ethic is more similar to my supervisors than mine is to the students that I'm teaching. So this would be someone coming to me saying this. But, I think, and someone made a statement earlier, in approaching it with your leadership in a phrase of, as a clinician, I want to make sure that I'm practicing the skills that I'm teaching, or that I'm practicing what I preach in terms of work-life balance, not being overloaded, to kind of like set the stage for this is how this conversation is going to go. Because we do work with individuals about how to keep things balanced, not being overloaded, and taking time to smell the flowers. So I think in starting with that, because it's one clinician to another, that type of an opening can be respected. But one thing I've learned about the VA is that everything is about the data and the numbers, right? And so I think before having that conversation, having some data about what is expected in terms of your utilization usage, and then what are your numbers? What is the average number of patients expected to be seen in a day? And what do your numbers look like? I think if you have a little bit of data to kind of bring that into the conversation, that kind of will serve that conversation well in soliciting some feedback from your supervisor. And then lastly, kind of rounding the conversation out with if they are aware of any tactics or any resources that you could utilize to kind of help you with managing your workload and or to help avoid burnout, right? Because when you leave it on that question type of a note, it kind of opens it up for the supervisor to be helpful in maybe sharing some things that you may not be aware of, like, do you use CPRS booster? Do you use Dragon for dictation, right? So being open to some feedback, but I think backing it up with some solid data and saying that you want to practice the skills that we teach, I think can help kind of bridge that kind of a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I think the kind of that advocation is really valuable. From my perspective, so I will always say, like, so prior to coming to the VA, I was working for a startup online medical company. So it was boom, 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 boom. The idea of work-life balance was, I think everybody worked roughly. I remember I worked pretty much every day of the week, and I was pretty much on call all the time. So shifting to the VA was actually slowing down in a lot of ways for me. And so that does definitely color my experiences. But one of the things that having that experience did create for me is the importance of being able to have a clear understanding of like what my expectations are for myself and what my expectations are of my employer. So kind of going into this question specifically, like what recommendations would I have for like talking with supervisors or talking to leaders about work-life balance concerns is, one, understanding what their expectations are and having those expectations be clear, and understanding how those things, and then also then being able to communicate what are your expectations for the role, because there may be roles that may not be great fits for us, that may ask a lot. My current role requires me to like be really flexible in how my veterans come in. So sometimes I'm into the community, sometimes I'm seeing them BBC, sometimes they might pop out because I work with a homeless population where like, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't make my appointment at 9 a.m. I was walking across town, and now I'm here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm like, do you happen to have availability? So having that flexibility and that understanding of like, what is that expectation of a role? It may be a different role where I'm working with a different population. Hey, it might be you're gonna have to be rescheduled for next week, but in this role, there may be a different expectation. So having a clear conversation with your supervise about what what the role is, what the expectations of your actions are in that role are really important. And then, and then additionally, when we're thinking about like generational norms, I think there is like, I think that ends up often coming up, not necessarily between us, like myself and my supervisors or my coworkers. It's sometimes almost the expectation of our veterans. Sometimes our veterans are often I work with once again, I work with a homeless population, and one of the challenges with it is that we do have an aging population of veterans, and definitely it's seen amongst our homeless population as well. And we see how the idea of how their expectation of how things being done as well. So not only advocating with our role, with our supervisors, but also advocating with the folks the veterans that we're serving, letting them know it's like, this is what I realistically can communicate. So I have a caseload of about 46 veterans that I see maybe on a bi-weekly basis. And I'm just saying, it sounds a lot, but I'm like, oh, it's only like 23 appointments a week. It's not that bad. But in that sense, it's like, many folks know it's like, yes, if you miss your appointment, I may have to wait about 2 weeks before you can see me again, but having those expectations, letting them know, even when there's these pulls and tugs. So long story short, or long story long, obviously, is that clear expectations of yourself and those around you I think is really important.
Yes, I absolutely love the point that you bring up about having those clear expectations with, not just with your leadership, but also with your clients and your patients as well, right? Because in kind of what we do, especially working with a veteran population, sometimes when we talk about self-care, oftentimes we'll hear, oh, I don't have time for that. It's not that important. I've got to put everybody else and all these other needs ahead of my own, right? And so in some ways, we are able to like almost model that behavior for our veterans, but in a way that, is clear, like right from the get-go, right? Like, yes, you can do X, Y, and Z as well as take care of yourself. So, and, Dr. Robinson, I also love your point about data too, being able to present, and say, hey, here's my RVUs and here is what my schedule allows for. And, it kind of feels like, maybe I'm pushing myself a little too far in this way. Maybe we can create some more space here. Right. And so kind of having that very clinical conversation, I see that as being such an excellent strategy. Thank you both for, kind of giving an explanation a little bit further. I want to be mindful of the time, but I also want to end with kind of a more vague question, really an open forum type question. And this is, what tips do you have for early career psychologists? And this can be something that is in general, something that relates to work, something that relates to personal life, something that, relates to the balance really that's in between. But looking back, right, for those of us who are, 1, 2, 3 years out, or, even 5 years out, looking back, if you could have a conversation with yourself early on in your career, what would that conversation look like? Or what tips can you give us that are starting out?
Okay.
If I'll Ben, I'll go ahead, Dr. Robinson.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I think what I would say is, we were talking a minute ago about the grad school mentality and straight A's and overachieving and things like that. I would also say probably every one of us spent a lot of time sort of with a somewhat narrow and specialized focus. And we kind of created our professional identity in graduate school, kind of leading up to that as the grand finale. And what I would say is, don't feel like you've that the rest of the story is necessarily written. I would encourage you to try to stay open to other opportunities to see what pulls you in, where you might stretch and see a place where you want to see if you can apply your clinical skills there, even though it's not part of the identity you already worked so hard to create. It's something to the side. I would encourage you to see your professional career as a journey that you do not yet know kind of exactly where it's going to go and how it's going to go, and allow yourself to maybe be pulled in to other areas that interest you. I think that would be a great antidote to burnout related to today, but I think maybe just generally good advice, that changing things within your career over time is probably a very healthy thing to allow yourself to do.
And I know we're talking a lot about avoiding burnout, and that is a real thing. However, I would say one thing I didn't regret that I would still recommend is those first few years going full throttle while you can. There will be so many other things in life that will pick up the longer you live it. So the earlier out of school, the fresher everything is mindset wise, get in on the publications, doing the research, joining organizations, because there will be a time for coast or neutral, right? But you really get to experiment and explore all that you're interested in that very beginning stage. So if you have the energy for it and you don't feel as if you're about to crash and burn, I say go for it. I mean, definitely as an early career professional, you get discounts when you join organizations. That goes away. Take advantage of it now because they think that we all achieve. I don't know what salary it is, but some organizations, the annual salary or membership is like, $300, $400, or $500. So while you're in an early career, join them, pay those student fees or the early career professional fees and just explore them and see what it's like. Go to the conventions, meet other clinicians from other states. Think about doing research with others, across state lines. So, I just say explore and enjoy that time as much as possible because before, you really get settled in and you have a lot more responsibilities, more admin stuff kicks in. Now's the time to really get your feet wet and exploring as much as you can.
I love these suggestions. I would just add on mentorship. That's been something that this is not a solo effort, especially in the VA system. I love, Paul, I think you mentioned that we work on teams, but I think thinking of your career long-term, I know that I can't retire till like 2041. I know that date, and so I don't know what the rest of that will look like, but I know who I'll talk to about it, and who, I not just talk to, but get support. And when you have the opportunity, serve as a mentor, because I find that so enriching. And I have one of my mentees here who invited me to this talk. And so I think just these relationships are great. And this is a wonderful part of the VA.
I guess lastly, it's just like I would say, just really get to enjoy it because like I know all of us came to this field because we enjoy some aspect of it, whether it be learning, whether it be helping folks, whether it be serving our veterans. As we get all caught up in, lack of a better term, the muck of it all, we can sometimes lose perspective of it, of like the reasons why we join it, doing the work we do. So it's oftentimes spending some time just reconnecting. It's why I like running in the morning. I recently even take out my headphones. I don't even listen to music. I just run, and then just go and I go and I just kind of clear my head and reconnect. And I think having that space and reconnecting with what makes you engage in these things and why it was valuable for you. If you're extra ridiculous, and you can start running marathons like me, because that's what I started doing once I finished graduate school. Because it's like you need more time. You need to just fill up the rest of your time. But other than that, but in all seriousness, just reconnecting with why you chose this profession rather than maybe going to be an accountant.
Well, thank you all so much. We are right here at the 4 o'clock time. So just a huge thank you to all of our panelists for putting in the time and the effort to answer these questions, for spending the time with us early career psychologists today. we appreciate you. And for everybody that attended, thank you so much for attending this webinar. We do have another webinar that will be coming up probably within December, sometime early December, and that one's going to be focused on research in the VA. So if you have questions about, what it takes to do research, to be in leadership within a VA setting, I highly encourage you to keep a lookout for those emails, as the save the dates will be coming probably closer to November. But thank you everyone again for attending and for speaking today. You all have an absolutely wonderful rest of the day.